Resident speaker for today, Michael Mapes. He's a Minnesota-based psychic medium and author, and he uses his psychic abilities to help the lives of others. He's done all kinds of things. He kept it underground for a while, and then he decided to go public with his gifts. He declared to his parents at age 5 that he had some psychic abilities, and then he got a little more public with it at age 19. He's done some things, not only just working with individuals, but with the police and private detectives. And he focuses on how spirituality can easily be applied to your life and can create the reality you desire. He speaks on a variety of topics, and his core message is really a simple one. Practical spirituality can be used to improve any situation in your life. With that, Michael Mapes.
Thank you for that, and then thank you so much for having me back. I thought a lot about what I wanted to talk about because we spend so much time in the spiritual community talking about love and light and joy and connecting with the truth of who we are. And I think part of the reason for that is because so many of us spent such a long time feeling guilty or unworthy, perhaps setting unrealistic expectations for ourselves, or we found ourselves outside of the rigid lines drawn by fundamentalism. And so when we found spirituality, it was like such a relief, because for the first time we could start to accept that we are perfect just as we are, and start to love ourselves in a more genuine way and appreciate who we are in a deeper way. And whatever way you found yourself at spirituality, which I define as the way you better get to know your own soul, it inspired something in you. So when I was 13, I found a passage in a book. I couldn't tell you anything about the book except for this passage, which described God as a diamond with many faces. And no way of viewing God is, or not viewing God for that matter, is more or less correct. And this passage really launched me on an exploratory journey, because I had never been exposed to that before. I knew that I didn't fit in with more traditional religion, but this kind of opened my eyes to the idea that there was a whole world beyond what I had known. And so whatever that was for you, it awakened in you the knowledge or the fundamental truth that your soul is basically good, that your soul is strong, that your soul is powerful, and that when you make mistakes, it's not so much because you're sinful by nature, or because your soul lacks something, or because your soul is imperfect. No, when you fall short and when you make mistakes, it's because you've forgotten that we're all connected. You've forgotten that you're an expression of the divine, and you've forgotten the truth about yourselves. And so when we came to this, it was such a sigh of relief, and it was such a liberated way of feeling, a way of feeling that we had never felt before, that we very much wanted to hang on to that feeling. And so I think that that's why we tend to focus a lot on the principles or the ideals of love and of contentment and of peace and of resonance. And those are beautiful, beautiful things to talk about. And so some of my favorite things to talk about. It's why I'm honored to call myself spiritual. It's why I'm honored to work in issues related to spirituality. But today I actually want to talk about something different. I want to talk about what's on the other side of that. And what I think is really the essential or an essential question of any serious spiritual seeker. And that is the question of suffering, the question of pain, the question of hardship, the question of betrayal. What does spirituality offer us in terms of a meditation, or in terms of insight into human challenge? And I think that this is so important, because many of us came to spirituality not because everything was going perfectly in our life, but we found our way to some other way of viewing the world because things were not going well, or because we had an incredible amount of personal pain. I know in my own life I started to take a very, very serious look at spirituality at a time when I was just experiencing a tremendous amount of personal pain. And every thought, idea, plan that I came up with to get myself out of that exacerbated that pain and got me into more trouble. So I was pushed to a place of surrender because of my circumstances and because of my own thinking. And I have worked very hard to turn some of those scars into strengths, to become very grateful for some of those personal challenges and some of that personal pain. And so what I want to talk about today is, first, what does spirituality have to say about suffering, and how do we as spiritual people come to answer the question, why do bad things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? And then how, through gratitude, indeed what I call the gratitude perspective, can we begin to move beyond the dark passenger of betrayal, the dark passenger of transgression, and the dark passenger of suffering. I think this is the existential question for spirituality, because if spirituality becomes something to gloss over rather than to more fully open us up to the human experience, I think it loses a lot of its potential. So my job in my work, I never look at it as my goal or my job is to get anyone to any particular place. That's your job. That's your responsibility. Just like it's my job to get myself where I need to be. I look at my job to live with as much awareness of what my highest good is, to live in accordance with my highest principles, then knowing on some level as I do that I encourage other people to do that. So that as I suffer less, I encourage other people to suffer less. Or so as I have more peace in my life, that perhaps I activate that in other people. And I think what is so clear to me, because I think we're really well-intentioned a lot of times, like we want to have that really easy answer for people when they're going through something difficult, or when they're in a traumatic period of their personal story. We want the one word or the one sentence adage to offer them. So it comes from a very good place. But I think what I often find when I'm working with a client who has experienced some trauma is that when I really listen in a very active way, when I show up and am present in that experience, so often my client doesn't need me to do anything for them. They are a resourceful person. They are a problem-solving person. What they need me to do is to hear them. They need me to see them, and then perhaps to say, I acknowledge how absolutely difficult that must have been for you. And so I think the real challenge when we consider suffering and pain, which are unpleasant, and we're so conditioned to never want to feel anything unpleasant, so I think our challenge is to go beyond the cliche, to go beyond the easiest answer, or perhaps the first answer that comes to our mind, and consider it in a deeper way. So what causes suffering? Where does pain originate from? I think this is the most important question. It's a question that people have asked basically from the beginning of time, so I've just decided to resolve it for you today. I hear people say a lot that we suffer so we can learn lessons, or we suffer so that we can evolve our soul. I think this tells part of the story, and I think it tells an important part of the story, because can you learn through suffering? Absolutely. I mean, suffering is a good teacher. It's like, as Eckhart Tolle says, for some people, suffering is their only spiritual teacher. So you absolutely can learn a lot about your soul from painful experiences. And many, many of us who have experienced loss or grief or betrayal or trauma have learned something about ourselves, which is, in what way did I attract this experience? And then something about how we like to respond to that experience in the future. So, you absolutely can learn lessons from suffering. But sometimes when people say this, there's almost an element of predestination, or there's almost an element of, well, you came here and you agreed to this. And that's where I think we have to deeply consider the question of free will. Because there is another way of doing business, which I might think of as the more genuinely spiritual way of evolving, or the more genuinely spiritual way of moving forward. And that's to move forward through joy. That's to move forward through expanding your awareness, through raising your vibration, through liberating your consciousness, so to speak. And there are certain individuals, you might think of Jesus, you might think of Buddha, you might think of a particular Zen master who exists at such a state of clarity. It's not that no pain exists, it's that they are able to transcend that pain by virtue of realizing that it is fundamentally an illusion. So through seeing through it. And this too, I think, is the option for us. So at a basic level, suffering originates whenever you are out of your natural state. So if we think of our natural state as one of grace, as one of deep resonance, as one of peace, I mean, if you think of your birthright is to vibrate at the level of love, or your birthright is to vibrate at a very high frequency. Anytime that you are out of balance with that, anytime that you have forgotten that, anytime that you are not feeling that sense of inner peace and then projecting that out into the world, pain originates, suffering originates. Another way of saying this is when you forget that you are linked to the divine, or when you forget that there is divinity within you, you suffer. I mean, this is the Course in Miracles tenet, that all suffering results as because of our belief in separation. So whether that's our separation from certainly one another, which I think is pretty easy to see. It's much easier for me to hurt you, to judge you, to criticize you, to go to war against you if you are separate from me. Or if I convince myself that in some way by doing that I am protecting myself or protecting my own self-interest. If I see myself as connected to everyone else, then it not only makes less sense practically, but it also hurts me to judge you, to criticize you, to put you down, not to love you, and then certainly to go to war against you or to deprive you of resources in some major way. But it's not just our separation from one another, it's our separation within ourselves. It's our separation from the God within us, or the divinity within us, or our highest self, or our universal self, whatever language or terminology there, translate where necessary, but it is that disconnection from the highest part of ourselves that causes us to suffer. Because suffering is not the natural state of affairs, it is the human-imposed state of affairs. So you might also think of suffering as resulting when we refuse to accept what is. You might think of this as more of a Buddhist way of looking at things, but I think the concept of being present also comes into play here. So anytime I have a situation in my life, and instead of accepting that situation exactly how it is, I say, well, here's what I would like it to be, or here's what I desired it to be, or here's what I think it should be, then I will suffer. Which I think is one of the reasons sometimes why if people just let themselves feel more fully what they are feeling at the moment, they can release it in such a deeper way. They can move past things in such a more real way. I think we don't want to feel nasty, or we don't want to feel bad. We want to feel pleasure. And so I think sometimes what we do is we have this trauma. We have this thing that's very difficult to deal with from a human perspective, and we keep it here. Instead of just letting it fill our soul, instead of just saying, I really don't feel all that lovely right at this exact moment of my life, because this is indeed difficult. And so what happens then is it's not that it's removed from us, quite the opposite. It's that it drips slowly into our consciousness, and we experience a duller pain for a more prolonged time. And I think this is where apathy comes from. I mean, at least if you're angry, you have some energy behind what you're doing. But I think when it drips in slowly like this, we get to this place of apathy. We get to this place of not caring. We get to this place of not being engaged. And that is a place where it is very, very difficult to enjoy what you are going